it's challenging to one day think that you're a literal god and that you control everything, and then the next day think that you're garbage. It's a whiplash effect in your mind and body and spirit that is still to this day hard to describe and explain to people.
Welcome to the Psychology Podcast. Today we welcome Gabe Howard to the show. Gabe is an award-winning podcast host, author, and sought-after speaker. He hosts the Inside Mental Health podcast and is the author of Mental Illness is an Asshole and Other Observations. He's been featured in numerous publications, including Bipolar Magazine, WebMD, Healthline.com, and the Stanford Online Medical Journal. Among his many awards, he is the recipient of Mental Health America's Norman Guitry Award and received a resolution from the governor of Ohio naming him an, quote, everyday hero. In this episode, I talked to Gabe Howard about living with bipolar disorder, an illness that is characterized by emotional highs and emotional lows. Gabe shares what phases of mania and depression are really like and how the sudden shifts feel so jarring. Even though the disorder has its own set of challenges, Gabe is a staunch believer in taking responsibility for his actions. He opens up about his journey of recovery and the coping strategies that have benefited him. We also talk about the common misconceptions about people with bipolar disorder and public figures who may have had this mental illness. We try really hard in this episode to humanize bipolar disorder, and I really appreciate Gabe's honesty and vulnerability throughout this entire chat. So without further ado, I bring you Gabe Howard. Gabe Howard, it is so great to have you on the Psychology Podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, fellow psychology podcaster, host of the podcast Inside Mental Health. Your interest in mental health, is it personal?
It's very, very personal. I live with bipolar disorder, and I guess the answer to the question is yes. Yes, it is personal.
I mean, that was a softball lobby because I knew today the topic of our conversation today is going to be living with bipolar, and that'll probably be the title of the episode. And we're going to have as real a conversation about this as possible. We're going to talk about the standard stigmas against it, and we're going to talk about maybe some taboo corners of the mind today.
I love
because,
it.
Love it. Yeah, well, I'm a big believer, Gabe. I'm a big believer in a humanistic approach that doesn't only focus on the positive. I'm really all about integration. It looks like you've done a lot of integrative work, if I'm understanding your journey correctly. Would you say that's accurate?
I do think it's accurate. It's been a long time. I've done a lot of work, and it wasn't a quick thing. So, and I'm still learning. The work is ongoing.
That's true. It never stops. I've only had one person in my whole life tell me that they're 100% self-actualized, but that's only one person. It's very hard to find anyone.
That person is wrong. I don't even need to meet them.
You're funny. In starting, I'm trying to think about what a good inroad to this would be. When did you start to think maybe you were different than others? Like, was it as a kid? In this particular way, you thought, my thoughts, my cognitions, my actions maybe are not, maybe there's something going on here.
I never thought that. If the specific question is when did I think I was different, I thought I was different my whole life, but I didn't think that it was tied back to cognition or disorder or illness or anything like that. Truthfully, and this is as sincere as I can be, I thought I was an asshole. I just thought I was an asshole because I couldn't do anything right. I couldn't follow instructions. I was desperately trying to, and I would for a while. And then I would zag to the left or to the right, depending on whether it was, mania or depression, or grandiosity, or all the nice little things that come with bipolar disorder. And then when those episodes would be over, I would look backwards and I'd think, well, I'm an asshole. Why did I treat people that way? And then regret would set in.
So interesting. But you lived undiagnosed, right, with bipolar for many years. When did you get a formal diagnosis?
I got a formal diagnosis when I was 26 years old after being committed to a psychiatric hospital. So that's the level of crisis that I needed for anybody to say, wow, something's going on here.
Yeah. And you, how old are you now?
I'm 46, so that was 20 years ago. Man, I'm
okay,
old.
cool. Just to get some sort of, idea of, no, I mean, it's amazing how fast time flies. So 26 years old, you're like, you kind of reached this breaking point moment, although maybe you wouldn't frame it in such a way. I don't want to impose
No, I'd frame it in that way. It was an absolute breaking point moment.
To say? Okay. Excellent. I'm all about the person being able to drive their own narrative. So please correct me if, I'm not trying to be politically correct. I'm just saying I'm trying to be compassionate.
I appreciate that.
So just let me know. Yeah. And so you had this breaking point moment, and something that really interests me about bipolar, something you kind of alluded to, is when you're going through a mania phase, sort of the after phase where you kind of are more in a reflective mode, and you're like, almost like, what have I done? Or almost like, and I personally can resonate with that to a certain degree. I tend to, if I drink too much coffee, I'll go on a shopping spree on Amazon, and 2 days later, I'll look around my room at like 10 new boxes and things I don't need, and I'll be like, what have I done? So is this kind of like it's more of a gradation versus like, I guess what I like to do when talking about mental illness is not treat it as though mental illness is, a special species of human, and then everyone else is normal. Do you know what I mean? I like to say it's probably just, it's all continuum. Would you say that's along the lines of a similar continuum, but maybe a little bit more intense, and maybe with other domains than just shopping on Amazon? But I do regret it all often,
So bipolar disorder can best be described as a spectrum that is just wider than the average person. Right. Most people don't reach suicidal depression where they think that their mom would be happy if they're dead. And most people don't go up so high, so elevated that they think they're a literal god that can accomplish anything and that the universe revolves around them. It's not that you can't be excited, right? Normal people are excited. That's fantastic, right? And it's not that you can't be sad. It's normal to be sad. And I think everybody has experienced that. But with bipolar disorder, it's just wider, and you spend more time in different sections. Nobody's ever going to call me calm. Right? Nobody's ever going to say, well, that Gabe, he's as steady as a rock. No, I'm always going to be known as sort of the gregarious guy. And that part is good. But when that gregariousness leads me to think that I can jump off a 100-story building and fly like Superman, or when that line of thinking makes me think that, hey, if I died, my mom would be so happy at my funeral because I finally made the right decision. That's when it gets into disordered thinking, and that's when it needs intervention.
Great. So it sounds like we're really much in agreement that it is a continuum.
Yes.
And I think framing it in that way allows us to humanize it a little bit more. I mean, I love humanizing mental illness. It's one of my favorite hobbies is humanizing mental illness. And so, a lot of people, what I really want to do is I want to bring people into this conversation, not treat it as though like, oh, we're talking to some human with a special, unique species of human with bipolar disorder. And then it's like the person totally can't relate. I think, we all go through moments where we, again, like with me, if I have too much coffee, it does something to my brain. Like there's something about dopamine, and that's relevant to this discussion. Dopamine, when you have too much coursing through, I get very excited about the possibilities of everything. It's like, oh, possibilities. So that's, so the mania stage of serious, diagnosed bipolar disorders is that on steroids to a certain degree, where you sort of see possibility everywhere, right? And you sort of, you unlimited possibility within yourself, but also possibility with every stimuli you encounter. I just see that as dopamine on steroids to a certain degree. But then the other side, the depression side, tell me about your personal experience. Does it usually follow? Have you noticed a cycle? Have you noticed like can you chart it out where you're like, oh, I know if I'm like this today, tomorrow I'm going to be like this. Did you notice a pattern like that? Or do you still notice a pattern? Yeah.
I didn't notice a pattern. Before diagnosis, I noticed no pattern. I didn't really notice anything. And in some ways, that's the crippling part of bipolar disorder. My parents would see a symptom of bipolar disorder, right? And grandiosity, right? Refusing to go to school, staying up for 3 days in a row, thinking that I know everything. And they think to themselves, okay, well, we've got a teenager that thinks he knows everything, doesn't want to sleep, and doesn't want to go to school. So they would punish me. Now, we now know those were symptoms of bipolar disorder, and then they would punish me. But here's the part where it gets sticky. I would just naturally cycle into the middle. So in my parents' mind, the punishment was working, but it was just luck. They could have done nothing. and it would have worked. It would, I'm making air quotes, it would have worked. They could have done absolutely nothing and I would have ended up in the middle. Or they would punish and punish and punish and punish, and I would just ramp up that behavior because you just never know what direction it's going to go. That was the hardest part for me. It was like an intermittent mood. I didn't even know what I was going to get when I woke up or when I went to bed. And it's challenging to one day think that you're a literal God and that you control everything. And then the next day think that you're garbage and that your family will celebrate your death. It's a whiplash effect in your mind and body and spirit that is still to this day hard to describe and explain to people.
That's a really powerful phrase. Have you used that before? The whiplash effect for bipolar? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
It's one of my favorite phrases when I describe bipolar disorder, because I don't think that people think about that enough. They don't think about this idea of going from one mood type to another and how that really feels. Both physically, it does have physical sensations, but it just mentally, how did you have the self-confidence to literally think that you could fly? And now you don't have the self-confidence to go to the grocery store and buy groceries or get out of bed. What is that like? And it's a lot.
It's a lot. Let's get really nerdy for a second. From an evolutionary perspective, there's a reason why the genes for bipolar remain in the human population. It is quite possible, and I don't mean to glamorize it at all with what I'm about to say, but it's quite possible that the things that people can accomplish within that mania phase kind of make it worth it from a genome perspective. When you look at the total arc of things, I imagine that when you're in that state, sometimes you can probably, I don't know, maybe there's a certain threshold. Maybe there's like when it's too much, it's obviously you're not being productive. But is there a certain, like, if you view it as a curve, an inverted U-shaped curve where too little and too much is not good? Do you think maybe there's a kind of optimal part of mania that you're like way more productive than you would be if you didn't have bipolar disorder at all?
These are always really tough questions for me to answer because mania, true mania, everybody agrees that dude is manic, is dangerous. And it's not productive because, like you said, you've got all these ideas. So you wake up one morning, you're going to start 1,100 companies. And I use 1,100 both to kind of be funny, but there is nobody in the world that can simultaneously run 1,100 companies. So what you have is this person that is spouting out all these ideas that sound really good. And listen, maybe some of them are really good, but they bounce from idea to idea to idea, and you just spread yourself way too thin. And again, nobody can run 1,100 companies. And listen, you can use whatever number you want. Nobody can run 5 companies, 3 companies, 10 companies. And that's the problem with mania. You don't know when to say no because no isn't part of your vocabulary anymore. But here's the second thing that I always say about mania. I think that sometimes mania gets credit for things that frankly isn't mania. I have experienced mania, and when people see me do really well, they see me on a stage, right? I'm 6'3", 240 pounds, and I stand on a stage, the spotlight hits me, there's 1,000 people in the audience, I'm holding the microphone, and I'm speaking, I'm working the crowd, people are cheering and laughing, and I'm a public speaker. It is my job. Every single time I walk off that stage, somebody will say, "You harnessed mania up there, didn't you?" No, I didn't. I didn't harness mania at all. I'm just really good at my job, and I practiced and I worked really, really hard. Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones is not manic. He's just Mick Jagger. Nobody ever accuses him of having mania. So, but they don't believe me. They're like, no. It's that mania that allows him to really control the crowd like that. I can't get away from that persistent rumor. It's not true, but people just don't want to believe it. So mania gets the credit for what's actually my success, which is another way that bipolar disorder is really horrible. I mean, not only is there a 15% death rate in bipolar disorder, but whenever you do something well, people are like, that's your illness. No, it's not. It's me. It was Gabe.
I really appreciate you saying that. Just to play devil's advocate a second, when
Please.
You've done something really terrible, are you also equally likely to say, take responsibility and say that was me, Gabe, or do you put that on bipolar?
Bipolar disorder may be the cause of something, but it's always my responsibility. So it really doesn't matter what terrible thing I do. It's my responsibility. I want to give an example because the audience, for some reason, has trouble grasping this a lot when I talk to people. If I am driving my car and I have a seizure and I run into your car, Scott, you get out of the car and you're like, hey, oh, wait. And then you see me having a seizure. You're going to understand immediately what happened. And in fact, you're going to provide medical care. You're going to call 911. You're going to say that this man is having a seizure and he wrecked into my car. And you're going to hope that I live and do well and get great medical care. And you're going to send me the bill for your car. And most people are like, yeah, that's really reasonable. It just because you had a seizure doesn't mean that Scott has to pay for his own damage. But for some reason, when you get to serious and persistent mental illness, bipolar disorder, depression, even alcoholism and substance abuse disorder, there's this tendency in the community to say, well, it wasn't my fault. Therefore, I don't have any responsibility for it. Nothing could be further from the truth. And frankly, it's just not an empowering statement. If you don't have any responsibility for it, then you're just owned by your illness. And bipolar disorder doesn't own me. It gets some space in my brain because there's no cure for it, but it gets as little as humanly possible. I am in control, not bipolar disorder. And by saying, oh, that's not my fault, it's bipolar, yeah, it wins. I don't like that. I don't like that it ever wins.
Yeah, I love that response. In due to no large part that's exactly how I would have responded to the question. So, we're in agreement.
He did not coach me, everyone. I want everybody to know that Scott did not coach me. I came up with that on my own.
I didn't coach you. No, that's correct. I like it because it's definitely, I agree with it. But I often like to tell people, I don't believe there's such thing as the real self. I don't like the notion of the real self. I think that it can lead us to not taking responsibility for the sides of ourselves that we don't like, and only taking responsibility for the sides we do like. So that's the spirit upon which I asked you that question, because I was curious where you were going to go with it. And I'm pleased you went with it where you went with it. But yeah, I completely agree. And I like, it sounds like you have a very healthy attitude, and I would say a healthy relationship now with your bipolar side, which is not all of you. But it seems like a lot of the work you've done is changing the relationship to that side. Would you say that's accurate?
That is absolutely accurate. Understanding what it is and what it's trying to do is the first step toward defeating it. You are right. I've got to learn to live with it because there is no cure. And part of my life is always going to be spent thinking about managing, getting ahead of, or just being aware of bipolar disorder. There's nothing I can do about that. It's my lot in life. It's the straw that I drew. There are worse things, but it's hard to accept that. I do understand, and I've had a lot of practice. I've had a lot of experience. I'm 46 years old. When I was 26 years old, it was harder. I always try to give like little graphs, like something that we can really grasp. When I went to the hospital, 100% of my life was controlled by bipolar disorder. And now I would say that 10% of my life is controlled by bipolar disorder. And but it was a hard fought 90%. Along the way, maybe at one point it was 80% was controlled, 90% was controlled, 50% was controlled. Then there's relapse. Relapse is part of recovery. Now 100% is controlled again, right? I got up to 50 and I just, I flew too high. But now I have a consistent, and again, these are Gabe's numbers, right? There's no way to measure these. I don't want anybody to think that, I took a test and found out. This is just how I choose to view it. But 90% that's a lot of life that's mine. And considering that I started with 100% was owned by bipolar and I took back 90, I'm going to take that as a win. And I think where people get in trouble is when they think they have that 100% back, because that means that nobody's watching bipolar disorder anymore. And that allows it to operate however it wants, unchecked.
Yeah. I hear you. I thought of another question as you were talking, because I'm not ready to completely let you off the hook with my question about when things go wrong, do you blame the bipolar? The only reason why I bring this up is, and this is just playing devil's advocate, in the beginning, you did kind of sound like you were saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like you were saying, I was wondering why I was being an asshole, and then I realized it was bipolar. So it sounded like you actually were, in fact, blaming bipolar, which contradicted what you said later. I'm just a nerd and I hate contradictions. So can you reconcile that for me?
I love it.
Yeah.
So what I meant to imply is that I thought I was an asshole. I was doing all of these things. And since I didn't have any understanding of what was happening, I just thought, well, I'm an asshole. And to expand out a little, the people around me thought I was an asshole too, right? My parents would look me dead in the eyes and say, don't do that. And then I would do it. And I'd think, why did I do that? Well, I didn't have any understanding of my pathology, my psychology, my symptomology. I didn't know anything. So in my brain, it's like, yeah, why did I do that? And humans, we like answers. We want to know why we did stuff. And the only thing that 12-year-old, 15-year-old, 20-year-old, even 25-year-old Gabe could come up with is, well, I must have done it because I'm an asshole. It's a nice little bow, and it answers the question of, why are you behaving this way? It's not a good answer. It's not a reasonable answer. And looking back, I really wish that I would have thought, why am I being an asshole? Like, that would have been a great follow-up question, Scott. But I just sort of shrugged it off. Well, I guess I'm an asshole. And then I moved on to the next thing, which may or may not been part of bipolar disorder thinking. But again, even the parts of bipolar disorder that I can't control, even when the reason is 100% because of bipolar symptoms, it's still my responsibility. I still have to take responsibility, make amends, correct it, and do better, whatever way that looks like. And it can look like so many different things.
Cool. Thank you. Your team wrote an email to me and they said, Gabe Howard is, quote, nearly unoffendable. So I assumed we could have a really honest conversation today, which is refreshing.
I think I am unoffendable, but we will find out. You can ask me.
Talk to your team about that. I don't know why they said nearly. Your team did say nearly, so you might want to have a talk with them about that. Yeah. We
don't like absolutes around the GabeHoward.com. We really try to stay away from absolutes, but this might be one of those absolutes, but I'm not sure. Time will tell.
Let's talk about some areas that you've argued we often gloss over when we talk about bipolar. The three areas: hypersexuality, lying, deceit, and anger. So let's start with hypersexuality. Can you explain to me, what is hypersexuality? I know what a high sex drive is, but how do you know when it's hyper?
The first thing, Scott, is obviously you are a doctor and a trained psychologist, so I'm positive that there is a legitimate medical definition, and I am not going to give that. I'm just sort of going to explain what hypersexuality is, and when I know that I've gone from high sex drive to uh-oh. A high sex drive is you want to have a lot of sex, and I think that's what people think that hypersexuality is. No. Hypersexuality is an all-encompassing addiction. You have to have sex. And I want to remind your listeners that sex isn't just, penis, vagina, or partner sex. Sex is also masturbation. And so no matter what you're doing, you're servicing this need to have sex. So for example, in hypersexuality, let's say that I'm actively engaged in intercourse with a partner. While I'm doing that, I'm thinking, okay, who am I going to have sex with next? And then as soon as I orgasm, I'm immediately now looking for the next person to have sex with. And if in a short amount of time, which could be 10 minutes, it could be a half an hour, it could be an hour, if I can't find a partner, then self-stimulation, masturbation, it becomes a thing. Everything is in surface to this compulsion to be having sex. That's what hypersexuality is. And I do think that people think that hypersexuality is just, oh, you're horny a lot. No, but being horny is a great thing. It's being unable to control it. It's honestly, it ruins sex. I like sex. I love sex. Sex is fantastic. But when you have this compulsion to do it, it's no longer about the joy of sex. It's now about servicing that compulsion or addiction. It's a need. And then it's not fun anymore. It ruins it. And I don't think that people understand that.
So how has that played out in your own personal life?
It's played out in a couple of different ways. First, I cheated on 2 partners. Now, I take full responsibility for that. The hypersexuality did not help. When you have this compulsion to constantly have sex, your spouse, your partner, they want to go to work. They want to do other things. There's no matching a hypersexual sex drive unless you find someone else who is also hypersexual. Maybe they can keep up for a couple of days, but eventually they've got stuff to do. They're like, hey, Gabe, that was a great weekend, but now I'm going to work. Well, now, okay, well, I'm not going to work because I got to service this compulsion. And I cheated. I did. I found other partners. I hired a lot of sex workers. I masturbated chronically. And it cost me jobs. It cost me marriages. It cost me the joy of sex for a period of time. And that's what it looked like. I'm really trying to like dress it up a little bit or maybe give myself some cover or the benefit of the doubt, but no, it looked like a chronically masturbating horn dog, and not attractive and not something that anyone should want to be.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. Can you please define chronically with me? What does chronic masturbation look like? How many times a day are we talking is chronic? How do we know if we've gotten to the chronic stage?
Well, one of the ways that I knew it is after orgasm, I would start up again, right? I wouldn't even clean up, but we're just doing it again. I know that's very, very graphic, but
men can do that. Men can do that.
Hypersexuality is
refractory period. Refractory.
Yeah, it really limits that, I think. And plus I was 20, that certainly helps as well. I was 20 years old and I was hypersexual. The record that I have, and I want to admit to everybody that this was, 10 years later, I figured this out, right? I wasn't counting at the time. I didn't have a clicker, but I orgasmed 26 times in a day, which is more than one an hour. And on one hand, there's like this part of me, this like toxic masculinity part. It's like, yeah, I had 26 orgasms in one day. Yeah, I did. But listen, it was not an enjoyable day. It was an awful day. And I can clean it up and make it sound awesome. I can, but it's look, it's not a good day. I use the example of a roller coaster, right? Think of your favorite roller coaster, right? You get to ride it. And then when you pull back into the station, like, hey, we're closing in a couple hours. You guys want to go again? You don't even have to wait in line. You're like, oh my God, this is the greatest ever. I get to ride the roller coaster again. But then they keep doing it over. Now you're on the 4th time, the 5th time, the 10th time, the 15th time, the 20th time. And you're thinking, I just went off this fucking roller coaster, and nobody will let me off the roller coaster except the nobody is you. You won't let yourself off the roller coaster. And I want to remind all of your listeners that I didn't know why. I didn't know why I was doing this. I was just doing it because I had to. And that's also kind of scary. What causes somebody to behave this way?
Tell me the arc of the journey of this one. So can it get better? Did it get better? Are you like, where are you at now with this? Do you only masturbate 12 times a day now?
I have a very high sex drive, and I've always had a very high sex drive. And
there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion.
There isn't. The only thing that's wrong with having a high sex drive is if your partner doesn't have a high sex drive. That can cause some issues. But I want to be clear that causing issues and infidelity are very, very different things, right? This is where open communication really matters. This is where deciding what you want really helps. One of the biggest thing that helps, just to throw it out there, is one of the first medications that I was ever put on for bipolar disorder. It had sexual side effects, just like, whoa. And it took that hypersexuality / high sex drive, that range, and shot it all the way down. And I know this is going to sound funny, but I went from wanting to have multiple orgasms a day to wanting to have one a day. And for many people, that sort of, dropping off a significant amount of your sexual desire is bad, but that was very helpful. That was very helpful to get me refocused and on my way. There's so much to talk about there in terms of, I don't want anybody to hear that sexual side effects and medications are a good thing, because for most people and most of the time, they are not a good thing. But in this particular case, it did help get me straight. The next thing that I want to remind the listeners of is hypersexuality is not 100% of the time. I would be hypersexual for a while. And then I would drop back down. I was always in the high range, but hypersexuality, it wasn't 24/7. It was moments.
It tracked the mania stages. Like, I assume
Generally,
that when you were
yeah.
in the depressive swing, you were not as high sex drive. Is that accurate?
When I was really depressed, I wasn't anything. I wasn't get up and go to the bathroom. I just laid there, frankly, trying to will myself to death.
God. Gabe, I hear you. I hear you. That hit. I hear you. Do you, when you're on the, because we haven't talked so much about that other side, have we yet? The depression side. In the depression side, would you ever feel something that would resemble the feeling of dead inside?
Yes. I talk a lot. It's my job. I write a lot. I host a lot of podcasts. I answer questions all over the country. I'm here right now being as honest as I can. And I struggle to describe the emptiness of severe depression. It's like staring into the abyss. I don't know. I don't think that's a good phrase, because if you're staring into the abyss, you're actively participating in the staring. Well, that shows you're doing something that almost sounds fun. Like we stargaze. You're staring at the stars, staring at the abyss. I mean, do you have an opinion about the abyss? You're aware that there's an abyss there, right? That almost sounds pleasant. It's worse than that. It's complete nothingness. It's as nothing as you can get, while still being aware to some extent that you're alive, but you just don't want to be. And the pain is so intense, but it's not physical pain. It's a pain that's unstoppable. You can't take painkillers. This is why people self-medicate with drugs and alcohol, because it's about the only thing that gives you a different sensation. I want to be clear. It doesn't help the pain. It just changes the pain from one sensation to another sensation. And that sensation might be more tolerable because, hey, at least it's different. I lack the words. I just lack the words to describe what this feels like.
Yeah. There's something really profound here that I'm trying to articulate. It seems like there's a deep existential pain when you're in that stage, but it also seems like when you're in the grips of a Mania episode, there's a great existential aliveness as well. It almost seems like they're both. Can you get one without the other? Can you get because like in the Mania stage, don't you often feel like you're fully alive? Like it's the exact opposite.
It is the exact opposite, and that's we're right back to my whiplash analogy. To go from feeling nothing to feeling everything it's just a lot. It's an incredible amount. But I want to give a little pushback on the phrase "feeling alive." I don't know that I feel alive in the Mania. I certainly feel something, but when I think about feeling alive, I at least want to be aware of what's happening around me. One of the things that Mania does so well is it changes what you see. The example that I love to use is I got thrown out of a bar once. Here's what I think happened. And as I'm sitting here, Scott, if lie detectors were real and worked, I would pass it, because this is what my brain shows me. Went to a bar, there was a local band playing. I jumped up on top of the bar. I started singing. The crowd was like, oh, this guy is an amazing singer. He's doing way better than the band. So they all turned around and they watched me instead of the band. The band, eventually realizing how great I was, stopped playing so that they too could gaze in my wonder. They were cheering for me, Gabe, 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 Gabe. And then people came over and like, oh my God, you're amazing. And they walked me out of the bar so happy that I was there and that they got to see me. This is what I remember with every fiber of my being. Here's what actually happened. I climbed up on the bar and started screaming. This, of course, alerted security. Eventually, because they couldn't get me down, they made the band stop playing. Everybody who was watching the band turned around to watch this and was screaming all kinds of, get down, motherfucker, get down, asshole, you stupid prick. But I didn't see that. And then eventually security coaxed me off the bar and threw me out, embarrassing me, my family, and my friends. Now, listen, I do remember that other thing. That's what's in my brain. But you and I both know my version cannot happen. First off, how did the whole crowd know my name? And nobody can sing louder than a microphoned bar band. That's just not even remotely possible. None of my story makes sense, but Mania convinced me that's what happened. And here's the good thing to your point. I feel like it did. You know how cool it is to be bigger than the band? It's such a great feeling, but it's not a real one. So when we determine, like, did you feel alive? I felt something, but it wasn't true. So what do I do with that?
Well, there's something, a lot of things very profound with that. I know that when I feel most existentially alive, it's usually in the quieter moments where I'm feeling a real authentic connection with someone, or I'm watching a beautiful sunset, or I'm in nature. It's usually during the plateau experience, as Abraham Maslow called it, not the peak experience. So what you do with that is probably you recognize that, and recognize that it's almost like the devil tempting you in a way. And I say devil tempting because I'm fascinated with something your team told me. They said at one point you felt like you had a demon inside you, or a demon was chasing you. What do you think was going on there?
So I had delusions, which to explain, delusions are you feel that it's true, but you can't see it. So it's not like a hallucination where you can see it or hear it. It's even though I never saw the demons, I knew that they were there. I was positive they were there. They were always right around the corner, right under the bed. They had just left the room. They were, for lack of a better word, they were trying to hurt me, but I would always stop them at the last minute. Or if something bad happened, I was positive they had a hand in it. And it's just, I don't know. It's like a 1980s spy movie, right? Where, you've got the mark, and then the spy is following them, and the mark keeps turning around, but the spy ducks behind the corner at the last minute. So the mark never actually sees the spy, but the mark is pretty sure they're being followed. That's what it felt like all the time. And make no mistake, the demons were trying to do me harm in the same way that the spy was.
Yeah. How did you confront your demons, so to speak? Where are you at right now today? Do you still feel the demons? Do you still feel the hypersexuality? Where are you right now?
I am in as close to perfect recovery as that phrase can allow. Wow. The medication did a really good job of stopping mania. The medication did a really good job of halting the demons. And once those two things were gone, that allowed me to start working on coping skills to handle anxiety, depression, and things of that nature, understand suicidality. Also, it allowed me to take a good look at some of my coping skills, right? My coping skills were not healthy. My coping skills were things like sex and food, drugs, alcohol, even drama. Just get in a fight with somebody and, hey, at least you can spend an afternoon screaming at somebody and you'll feel something. These are coping skills. They're just not good ones. Once I was able to look at all of those things, I could start making much better decisions. So where I am today is I've got the medication to help me control the extremes of the emotional spectrum that I was unable to control on my own. And then I've got years of therapy and practice and experience and coping skills to learn the best way to handle situations that, frankly, I was unable to handle before. And I'm really big into examples, Scott. I always use the example of, the very first time you get in a car to drive, it is just incredibly overwhelming. But after you learn to drive, you're just, you're just chilling along. You got one hand on the wheel. You don't even realize you're doing half the stuff. We're all checking our cell phones, which is dangerous and we should stop it. But at one point we went from terrified to drive and worried that something bad was going to happen to so comfortable and secure in our driving, we're checking our cell phones. That's sort of my journey, right? When I first started, I was so terrified of everything, and I had to work all the way up to becoming comfortable in my own skin. Now, I don't want anybody to hear that I'm perfect. I do have setbacks. Sometimes a little bit of mania slips in, or a little bit of depression slips in, or a little bit of hypersexuality slips in, or a little bit of grandiosity slips in. The real big difference is I spot it immediately. Whereas before, it had to do real damage. before I noticed. And that's really the difference. I don't have to wait until the entire house is engulfed in flames to realize that if a couch cushion is on fire, I need to get the fire extinguisher.
Well, that's a really good point. I've personally found, not to the same degree as you, but I found that a regular mindfulness practice has been essential to me. I think, how has mindfulness played a role in this at all in your life?
I'm not a big fan of mindfulness, and I always get booed when I say that, and I deserve it. Here's why I deserve it.
I won't boo you.
I'm not, well, you should, based on what I'm about to say next. I'm not a big fan of mindfulness, but I'm absolutely a big fan of being aware of your surroundings, your body, your emotions, and focusing on things in order to calm down, which everybody points out to me is in fact mindfulness. I'm like one of those vegetarians that won't admit they're a vegetarian, but won't eat meat. Like, that makes you a vegetarian. Nope, not a vegetarian. I just don't eat meat. Right. That makes you a vegetarian. Nope, I won't take the title. I don't know why I don't like the phrase mindfulness, because being aware of yourself, being aware of your surroundings, focusing, taking a break and not reacting. And by taking a break, I don't mean a 15-minute break. I mean, somebody does something that makes you mad, and before the very next nanosecond, I would want to jump. And now I can take a moment, take a deep breath, wait 3 seconds to respond, and the world changes for me. That's a mindfulness technique, but I don't like it, so I say I don't do it. Like I said, you should really throw something at me. It would be very, very fair.
Well, that's not my style, first of all. I also think that that's your, sort of contrarian personality, which we're not blaming on bipolar. That's just part of who Gabe is coming out. I believe there probably is a contrarian side to you. So I hear you. That's cool. That is mindfulness. But I actually think that it is important to distinguish, as I often do, between mindfulness meditation and everyday mindfulness. And I'm a big fan of everyday mindfulness as well, and being able, we're practicing that in this moment. Absolutely. Okay. A couple other things that were the scarier realities, in addition to hypersexuality, anger, I believe, was one, and lying, deceit. Where are you at with those now? How many times have you lied to me today?
I have never lied to you, Scott. I assure you. Aww. I want to touch on lying for a moment, because people hear lying and the deceit and they're like, aha, see, I knew that people with bipolar disorder were manipulative and dishonest, and that potentially maybe, right? But when you start saying that everybody that's X is Y, you get yourself into trouble. And there's certain things that we would never tolerate. Could you imagine if somebody said, well, all women are X? People would be like, oh my God, that's so sexist. That's misogynistic. Why would you say that? But yet it exists in society where people say, well, people with bipolar disorder are X. And everybody's like, yeah, that's true. The lying and deceit is one of them. First off, it is certainly possible that they're not lying or being deceitful at all. They're just wrong. There were no demons under my bed. I can't be more clear. Demons were not chasing me, but I told everybody and their brother that I was worried about this, that somebody was following me, that I solicited help based on this external threat that did not exist. For people who didn't understand what I was going through, they're like, look, he's pretending that he's in danger to elicit sympathy. Can you believe that deceitful liar? Yeah, but I didn't know that. The demons were very, very real to me. And I think that people don't understand that. We do a lot of things to protect ourselves based on our feelings and our perceptions. And perception is reality. And I think a lot of times people with bipolar disorder are put in this really small little box that they're being manipulative and lying and being deceitful for one reason and one reason only. And that reason is malice. They're bad. They're doing it on purpose, when you really need to scratch below the surface and see that there is just much more to it. Now, all that said, it's certainly possible. You can live with bipolar disorder and be anything, right? We love to say, hey, do you have bipolar disorder? You can be anything that you want to be. And I'm like, well, what about a con artist? No. Bipolar people are good. It's like, well, wait a minute. You said we can be anything. So that by definition encompasses all of the bad things as well. But painting anybody with one single brushstroke is dangerous. But I do hope that the listeners who maybe love somebody with bipolar disorder or don't understand bipolar disorder stop and think for a moment, hey, is my loved one lying? Are they being deceitful? Or are they just wrong? Because being wrong is a very different flavor than being maliciously lying, deceitful, or manipulative.
Yeah, I needed to let that sit for a second. That's a good quote. All things equal now, knowing everything you know, do you prefer being even keel over ever experiencing a manic episode? Like, would you take never experiencing that high if it means that you'll never experience that low?
Yeah. Oh, in an absolute heartbeat. Just yes, like unequivocally yes. But I want to give pushback on the phrase even keel. Nobody is going to describe Gabe as even keel. I am loud and I am funny and I am boisterous and I am gregarious and I'm all of these things, right? And so that's the trick. I think that's the trick. So many people with bipolar disorder believe that what therapists and doctors and medication are trying to do is turn them into, boring, monotonous, one-trick ponies that just, hello, my name is Gabe. I am cured from bipolar disorder and I am here to serve. I understand that part of the treatment, especially in the beginning, if you're being over-medicated or you've got an overzealous therapist or you yourself are being overzealous because of the pain, frustration, and damage that being untreated may have caused, I can see how people end up there. I want to be very clear. If you end up a boring, monotonous person and you don't want to be a boring, monotonous person, you haven't reached recovery yet. There's still a lot of work to do. You've got to figure out how to get out of that and have more of your personality, as much of your personality as you can safely get in. But, mania is not real. Depression's not real. There's a 15% death rate, right? We love to talk about like Vincent van Gogh. Well, he has bipolar disorder and he was a great artist. He's dead, right? Like he killed himself. He died by suicide. He's no longer here. You can talk about his great art until, the cows come home, but he's not able to create anymore. And his family, they miss him. His friends miss him. That's what bipolar disorder ultimately did to him. Whether or not it helped him create great works is certainly up for a debate. But even if it did, it still ultimately ended his life. And I think we do need to sit with that for a moment and recognize that these symptoms of bipolar disorder are dangerous. And the people who they hurt the most are not around to remind us of that. I don't know how Vincent van Gogh feels about dying prematurely due to suicide, but I gotta figure maybe he feels not good about it, but we'll never know because he's not here. All that's here is the people that can love his art. And that sort of elevates the romance of some of these things, maybe in a way that doesn't serve us as much as we think that it does.
Did Vincent van Gogh, did he have bipolar disorder?
So that's a tough one. I'm not a big fan of diagnosing people posthumously, but the bipolar community loves to claim them. We don't know. Bipolar disorder wasn't a thing back when Van Gogh was alive. It wasn't diagnosed. We certainly had like mental conditions, but the DSM didn't exist. So whether or not he actually had bipolar disorder is up for debate, because obviously no modern psychiatrist, psychologist, or therapist could evaluate him because he lived not in our lifetime. But people feel like he had it and Abraham Lincoln had it, even though again these people were never evaluated by modern psychiatry.
Do you realize that you have an uncanny physical resemblance to Vincent van Gogh?
I have been told that more than once. I want everybody to know I have both ears.
I mean, it's really uncanny. I mean, just do a Google Images search.
I love it. I'm gonna be Gabe Van Gogh from here on out. That's gonna be my new stage name.
How do we know you're not Vincent van Gogh reincarnated?
I mean, we don't. And listen, remember, we have people right now who believe the earth is flat. So I think you might have started the next big conspiracy theory. I love it. It's going to be, at least this will get my name out there and hopefully can raise awareness about living with serious and persistent mental illness.
Fair enough. Well, we're definitely not in the business of formally diagnosing public figures. However, when you see Kanye West, what do you see? Do you see some characteristics that are in the similar family as bipolar?
Well, Kanye West has come out and said that he has a bipolar diagnosis, so that obviously changes it. We know, but
there you go.
Yeah, I mean, he was evaluated and given the diagnosis, so we know that he has it. But in some ways, Kanye West has a textbook case, but nothing's as simple as a quick answer, right? Here's one of the problems with diagnosing bipolar disorder, right? Let's look at mania and grandiosity. If I said to you, the whole world loves me, and I am the best there ever was, and I am the greatest, you as a psychologist would think, okay, well, that's kind of grandiose thinking, so maybe Gabe's showing some symptoms. But when Kanye West says it, he can defend it. He's a multi-platinum artist. His clothing lines have made millions of dollars. Literally a couple of years ago, I think 3 or 4 now, he was sitting in the Oval Office talking to the President of the United States. He has millions of fans all over the world. So is that grandiosity or just fact? And it does make it difficult, I think, if you're a public figure like Kanye West, to decide whether or not this person is actually experiencing these symptoms. Now, we can move on to his personal life, the way that he's treated the mother of his children, the behavior that he's exhibited in front of his children, the things that he has said that are vaguely threatening and not connected to reality and scary. Those things are really the bigger clues into Kanye West's illness. And I think that this is where him being wealthy and famous is doing him a disservice. I think if any ex-husband, father of somebody's children, behaved in the way that Kanye has towards the mother of their children, their ex-wife, they would get help. Somebody would say, look, dude, you can't do that. You can't hide in the bushes. You can't threaten people. You're scaring your children. And if they weren't arrested, they would certainly be herded in the direction of help. Kanye West isn't being herded in that direction. In fact, people just sort of watch him as a sideshow. He's like a 1920s circus freak show as far as the tabloids and most of America is concerned. As someone who lives with bipolar disorder, I have a love-hate relationship with him. On one hand, he's doing vast amounts of damage. He is absolutely hurting the people around him and members of the public by saying things like, well, I don't need medication. I don't need treatment. Bipolar disorder is a gift. That's very, very dangerous. But on a human level, this man is in real pain and he's missing an opportunity to watch his children grow up. And all because he can't get the help and support that he needs for an illness that he did not ask for. And I imagine he does not want.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that question. I want to understand something about the medications you've taken in your life. Are they mood stabilizers, I assume?
Yes.
They are mood
stabilizers, antidepressants, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety. I've been on all of them.
Okay, you're on a cocktail. You're on a cocktail.
I got the cocktail.
Cocktail. What was the one? Okay, well, we don't need to mention specific things. That's fine. Okay, Gabe, I really want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and being so honest. Your team told me 2 things about you, fun facts. 1, you hate being called brave and you hate being called a hero. And they also said, quote, ultimately, he is open to anything. I can say that after talking to you today, I agree with that.
Oh, I love it. Thank you.
And I really enjoyed this conversation today. So thank you for raising awareness about what it's like to live with bipolar disorder.
Oh, Scott, thank you. Thank you so much for getting me out to your audience and raising the profile and having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Psychology Podcast. If you'd like to react in some way to something you heard, I encourage you to join in the discussion at thepsychologypodcast.com or on our YouTube page, The Psychology Podcast. We also put up some videos of some episodes on our YouTube page as well, so you'll want to check that out. Thanks for being such a great supporter of the show, and tune in next time for more on the mind, brain, behavior, and creativity.